In 1931, psychologist Winthrop Kellogg and his wife Luella made an extraordinary decision. They would raise a baby chimpanzee alongside their own infant son as if they were twins, treating them identically to see what would happen. The experiment began on June 26, 1931, and involved their 10-month-old son Donald and a 7.5-month-old female chimpanzee named Gua. For 9 months, the Kellogg's raised the two siblings together in their home in Orange Park, Florida, feeding them the same food, dressing them in similar clothes, playing the same games, teaching them the same lessons, and meticulously documenting every detail. The central question driving this controversial experiment was, how much of human behavior is learned versus innate? If you raised a chimpanzee exactly like a human child, would it learn to behave like a human? And would the human child adopt any ape-like behaviors? What happened over those 9 months was both fascinating and disturbing. Initially, Gua outpaced Donald in many physical and social skills. She was stronger, more coordinated, and better at solving certain problems. She learned to understand pointing, follow commands, and show affection. She seemed to be becoming more human-like. But as months passed, a troubling pattern emerged. Donald began imitating Gua more than Gua became human. At 19 months old, Donald was making chimp sounds, barking and grunting, instead of developing human speech. He was learning to speak chimp rather than English. By March 1932, alarmed that their son's language development was being harmed, the Kellogg's abruptly ended the experiment. Gua was returned to the primate facility. Donald's speech eventually developed normally, and he grew up to become a psychiatrist. But Gua died just 1 year later in 1933, possibly from the trauma of losing her family. The experiment raised profound questions about nature versus nurture, the ethics of using children in experiments, and the treatment of animals. This is the story of Donald and Gua, an ape and a child, raised as siblings in one of psychology's most controversial experiments.
The scientific context. The 1930s were a revolutionary period in psychology. Researchers were pushing boundaries to understand human behavior and development. The central debate, nature versus nurture. The question, how much of human behavior is innate, nature, genetics, biology? How much is learned through environment and upbringing, nurture? Could environment overcome biology? Behaviorism. The dominant school of thought was behaviorism, championed by psychologists like John B. Watson, who famously claimed, "Give me a dozen healthy infants, and I'll guarantee to take any one at random and train him to become any type of specialist I might select." This suggested environment was everything, that with proper conditioning, you could shape anyone into anything. The ape question. Researchers were fascinated by our closest relatives. How intelligent are apes? How much can they learn? What separates humans from apes? Could the gap be bridged through education? Enter Winthrop Kellogg with his radical proposal. Part 2. The experiment begins. Donald and Gua. Winthrop Kellogg, who he was. Comparative psychologist, PhD from Columbia University, interested in animal behavior and learning. Believed a rigorous experiment could answer fundamental questions about human nature. The plan. Kellogg proposed raising a baby chimp and human infant together. Treat them identically, same food, clothes, games, and lessons. Document every difference and similarity. Determine how much of human behavior is learned. The participants. Donald Kellogg, born September 30th, 1930, the Kellogg's biological son, 10 months old when the experiment began. Healthy, normal infant. Gua, a female chimpanzee, born November 30th, 1930, 7.5 months old when the experiment began. Obtained from a primate research facility. Healthy, normal chimp infant. June 26, 1931. The experiment began. Gua arrived at the Kellogg home in Orange, Florida, For the next 9 months, she and Donald would be raised as twins. The daily routine. Both wore diapers and children's clothing, ate the same meals, though Gua needed different portions, played with the same toys, slept in cribs in the same nursery, were bathed, dressed, and disciplined identically. The Kellogg's documented everything with detailed notes, photographs, and measurements. Part 3. The results. Gua outperforms. Donald imitates. Early observations. Gua's advantages. In the first months, Gua excelled in many areas. Physical skills. Much stronger than Donald. Better coordination and balance. Could climb easily. More agile. Faster reactions. Problem solving. Better at reaching for objects. Could open containers Donald couldn't. Used simple tools more effectively. Navigated obstacles better. Social understanding. Learned to understand pointing and gestures. Followed simple commands. Come here. No. Showed affection appropriately. Read human emotional cues. Adaptation. Made progress with toilet training. Learned to use spoons awkwardly. Tolerated wearing clothes. Adjusted to human household routines. The Kellogg's were impressed. Gua seemed to be becoming human-like. The problem, language. But Gua couldn't speak. Made chimp vocalizations, barks, grunts, screeches. Chimps lack the vocal anatomy for human speech. No amount of training could overcome this biological limitation. This wasn't entirely surprising, but what happened with Donald was alarming. Donald's imitation. By late 1931 and early 1932, Donald, now 16 to 19 months, should have been developing speech. Most children his age were saying words like mama, dada, simple phrases, but Donald wasn't speaking. Instead, he was imitating Gua, making barking sounds, grunting and screeching like a chimp, using chimp-like calls to communicate, learning to speak chimp instead of English. He was also adopting other chimp behaviors, biting like Gua, rough physical play, less gentle interactions. The Kellogg's became alarmed. Was raising Donald with a chimp harming his development? Part 4. March 1932. The experiment ends. The decision. By March 1932, after 9 months, Donald was 19 months old. He had a vocabulary of only about 3 words. Mostly, he made chimp sounds. His language development was clearly delayed. The Kellogg's faced a choice: continue the experiment and risk their son's development, or end it and return Gua. The choice was clear. Donald's well-being came first. March 28, 1932, Gua returns. For Gua, this was devastating. She had bonded with the Kellogg family, especially Luella. She knew no other chimps, had been raised as human, now was being returned to a cage. The separation was traumatic for Gua. Gua's fate, tragic. After returning to the primate facility, Gua struggled to adapt to life with other chimps. She had been raised human and didn't know how to be a chimp. She died just 1 year later in 1933 at approximately 3 years old. Cause of death listed as illness. Some speculate she died of a broken heart or failure to thrive. This tragic ending raised serious ethical questions about the experiment. Donald's recovery. After Gua was removed, Donald's language development accelerated. He began speaking normally. By age 2 to 3, he caught up to typical development. He grew up healthy, graduated from Harvard Medical School, became a psychiatrist, married, and had children. But the experiment may have left psychological marks. Donald rarely spoke about it publicly. He committed suicide in 1973 at age 43. Some speculate the experiment affected him, though his suicide may have had other causes.
Part 5. The Ethical and Legacy. The ethical problems. By modern standards, the experiment was deeply problematic. Regarding Donald, no informed consent, he was an infant, exposed to potential developmental harm, used as an experimental subject by his own parents, long-term psychological effects unknown. Regarding Gua, removed from her species, raised in an unnatural environment, bonded to humans who then abandoned her, returned to captivity after knowing family life, died shortly after, possibly from psychological trauma. Modern ethics boards would never approve this experiment. What the experiment showed. The scientific findings. 1. Nature and nurture both matter. Environment can shape behavior significantly, but biology sets fundamental limits. Chimps raised as humans remain chimps. Humans raised with chimps can be influenced negatively. 2. Language is biological, requires human vocal anatomy, requires proper human language models, can be delayed by inappropriate models. 3. Critical periods exist. Early childhood is crucial for language development. Missing these periods can have lasting effects. The legacy. The ape and the child experiment became a famous, if controversial, case study in psychology. Demonstrated both the power and limits of environment. Raised awareness of ethical issues in research. Contributed to the development of research ethics guidelines. Later, similar experiments shifted to teaching apes sign language, avoiding the vocal anatomy problem. These were more successful and less ethically problematic. Conclusion. In 1931, psychologist Winthrop Kellogg raised his 10-month-old son Donald alongside a 7.5-month-old chimpanzee named Gua as if they were twins. For 9 months, Donald and Gua lived together. Same food, same clothes, same toys, same treatment. The question, would Gua become human-like? Would Donald become ape-like? Initially, Gua excelled, stronger, more coordinated, better at problem-solving. She learned to understand humans and show affection. But Donald began imitating Gua more than Gua became human. At 19 months, Donald was barking like a chimp instead of speaking English. In March 1932, the Kelloggs ended the experiment. Gua was returned to the primate facility. Donald's speech recovered, but Gua died 1 year later, possibly from the trauma of losing her family. The experiment showed environment matters, but biology sets limits. Chimps can't become human no matter how they're raised. Humans raised with chimps can be negatively influenced. Language requires human models. But it also showed the ethical problems of experimenting on children, the cruelty of raising an animal as human, then abandoning it. that scientific curiosity must have limits. Donald grew up to be a psychiatrist, but died by suicide at 43. Gua died at 3, possibly of a broken heart. The ape and the child experiment answered questions about nature versus nurture, but at what cost? 1931 to 1932, when a boy and a chimp were raised as siblings, and both paid a price for science. Fascinating, disturbing, unethical, unforgettable. As always, thank you to all my Patreon patrons. You make this channel possible. The Fear Files posts videos covering true stories from history. The channel is made possible by supporters on Patreon and YouTube channel members. Huge thanks to everyone who supports this channel. If you found this documentary thought-provoking, please like and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes this content possible. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video.